Welcome to RICO 12. My name is Justin, and I'm a child of an all-powerful and all-loving God and a recovering addict, and am blessed to be the host of this meeting and podcast. RICO 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to gain tools and hope from others who are walking this path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented so many fellowships, addictions and afflictions, and professions, and we look forward to continuing to add to the diversity of speakers and backgrounds. Today's speaker for the 181st meeting is Dr. Andrew Bauman, who will be speaking on the topic of stumbling toward wholeness. We'll get to his talk in the Q&A afterwards in just a minute. First, for a little bit of business. The RICO 12 family of recovery resources continues to grow and have more resources for the addict and the loved ones of those addicted. If you have not listened to any of the other RICO 12 podcasts, including RICO 12 Shares, RICO 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M, and the RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable podcasts, I highly recommend you check them out wherever you listen to podcasts. The links to these podcasts are in the show notes of this and all RICO 12 episodes. I'm super excited about all of these resources and more to come. Your donations and subscriptions are making this all possible, as there are costs to build and maintain them all. On that note, RICO 12 is a self-supporting service. We appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. I want to thank a few of our spearheads and donors. Thank you to Catherine, Sharon, Ashley, and Therese for your donations. If you would like to become a spearhead and support RICO 12 and our mission, please consider going to www.rico12.com/support and make either a one-time donation or become a monthly spearhead donor. We look forward each meeting to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'll introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Andrew Bauman. He just defended his doctorate this last week, so we're excited to have a new doctor on with us. Dr. Andrew J. Bauman is a licensed mental health counselor with a doctorate of arts in counseling psychology from the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. Andrew is the author of How Not to Be an Ass, The Sexually Healthy Man, Floating Away, Stumbling Toward Wholeness, The Psychology of Porn, and with his wife, Dr. Christy Bauman, A Brave Lament, which is a book and also an award-winning film. He is also the founder and director of the Christian Counseling Center for Sexual Health and Trauma. Andrew, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be with you and all the people listening. So thanks for having me. We're going to talk about Stumbling Towards Wholeness today, which is a book I wrote a few years ago, but it's a model for healing and how it came about. I was working with clients in my private practice and just realizing we needed more language from theology to psychology to healing. A lot of my clients could easily name their darkness, their sin, their depravity, their addictions, but they had a really difficult time kind of naming their goodness and their glory, stepping into true healing, coming home, being liberated from their addictions. And so as I was reading the Bible, I came across the classic parable, the parable of the prodigal son, which most of us are most likely familiar with, and realizing that this could be the bridge in understanding a new model for healing. And so what that is the story of the prodigal son, the elder brother, and the story of the father is the story of us all. We have all three characters within us, all three realms, and they're constantly at work in us. This parable is alive in us, and we're moving towards transformation. And so how do we engage these three characters and make it more personal, and how does it impact our healing? And so that's what we're going to talk about today, which is the essence of the book. And so the first realm is the son realm. This is when we wrestle with shame and we wrestle with deep self-hatred, right, of our addictions. We seek for ways to escape our pain, i.e. addiction, right? We run from our goodness and we don't believe we have worth, right? So for me, it was my 13-year addiction to porn. Luckily, I've been sober for about 13 years now. But early on when the internet became a thing, my parents split up we never talk about it. We just went on vacation and never went back to my father. Right. And so it created this hole in me. It created this wound that, again, not talking about it, going to church 3 times a week, continuing to spiritually bypass the pain rather than enter into the pain, which created this longing to be seen, longing to be known. And for me, the drugs and alcohol never really did it for me as much as the objectification of women, soothing my pain. So that was my addiction. So that, if you think about it in the realms, that was me living in the sun realm, right? That was me eating from the troughs, right? That was me trying to feed that hunger, that pain with, the pig trough, nothing that was actually going to sustain me. I was longing for that pain to be soothed, and yet I did that in an incorrect way. So that's the shame, right? When you think of the son, when he comes back to his father, when you think of the classic story, right? He comes back to the father. He's like, "Hey, make me a slave. Like, I'll work it off. I'll try." Which, again, it was a third of the estate. It would be impossible for him to work it off. And yet he was like, "Hey, I hate myself. I'm full of shame. Take me. I'll do whatever it takes." How many of us tried to earn back, right? Work off the people we've harmed, the spouses we've betrayed, right? And we never can earn it back. So when we're in that realm, that is not a healthy realm. And then we also end up in the elder brother realm. If you remember the elder brother, right? The elder brother is motivated by duty rather than desire, right? He is about performance-based gospel, the illusion of control. In this realm, we have to face our own entitlement, right? I deserve this. We have to face our own harsh judgment towards ourselves and our contempt towards others. Self-righteousness makes us feel powerful. It's similar to the journey of the younger when he's escaping his pain, but this is just different, right? So when we're in our elder brother, we are arrogant, right? Well, I don't need that. I don't need recovery. Well, look at those people over there. Wow, those porn addicts are, gross, but I just drink a little bit. Whatever it is, whatever we get that posture, right? That arrogant, entitled posture that it's their fault, right? I deserve a seat at the table. Why do you kill the fattened calf? I deserve the party, Dad. I've been working so hard, right? I've been working the steps. I've been going to all these meetings. Don't I deserve this, right? So it's that posture of entitlement rather than living from his heart. He's just as lost as the younger son, right? The younger brother. He's just lost in a different way, right? His self-righteousness makes him feel big, makes him feel strong. And that too is no closer to healing, right? Than the sun realm, right? It just looks a little different. So think of this realm, think of the Pharisees, right? This is that posture. And yet I am a Pharisee, right? I am the elder brother, just as I am the younger. And finally, our goal towards transformation is to step into the Father realm, right? God is in us. When you think of 2 Corinthians 13:5, don't you recognize this about yourself, that Jesus Christ is in you, right? Galatians 1:15, God was pleased to reveal his son in me, right? So God is in us. What does it mean for us to step into our true healing? Would be to embody the God who lives within us. And this is where the victory is. This is where the redemption is. A few categories of stepping into the Father realm. We have to befriend grief, right? If you think of the Father, right, off in the distance, he strips his shoes, he's running, right? He thought he was dead and now he's alive, right? That beautiful part of grief, right? He celebrated hard because he grieved hard. Like that's the part that I really gained from that passage. He threw that wild party because he grieved the death. He thought he was dead and now he's alive. So for us to befriend grief about our stories. So what is your story? What is your pain behind the addiction? Will you step into that to truly liberate yourself by befriending grief? Stepping into that. Another part of that realm is to extend kindness to ourselves and to others. Right? Did the son deserve that? No. Do you deserve that type of radical grace and love? No. And yet it is offered. And it's offered the same to the son and to the elder brother. The invitation to party is the same, which is awesome, right? That's the liberation from addiction, from freedom, is that you get to party when we step into this place. Also, to surrender control, right? The Father loves wildly. Will you love yourself in that way? And I know that can sound a bit prideful, and yet it's anything but prideful, right? Loving yourself well is honoring the God who made you. The Father's gracious love towards both sons shows that there's space to offer unconditional love to our own shame, our own contempt, our own entitlement, our own judgment, right? If we can join the Father's radical kindness towards ourselves, our sins, our failures, no longer judging, but allowing God's kindness to guide us, right? To experience restoration and celebration. These are the three realms that we all live in. And you may be in a different, depending on where you're at in your journey, you may be in a different realm. Our goal is to step into the Father realm, and it's the most difficult. I promise you. Part of me loves to be the judge, right? It makes me, it's this sick, twisted thing. I feel good about it, right? There's this thing of pride that I can, well, I'm not like those people, right? And yet I also get something if I'm in a place of shame and self-contempt. And yet Romans, what is it? 4:2, 2:4, one of those. It's the kindness of God that leads to redemption, right? The kindness of God, not the self-hatred of God, not nailing ourselves on the cross and the self-contempt, beating myself for years. I beat myself, right? Try to harm myself into, redemption. I knew it was wrong. My objectification of women and using porn. We do all these accountability groups. We, just I could tell you this ridiculous stories of what we would do to try to recover, kind of praying for God to make me a eunuch, right? So I no longer sin. It's just like the abuse didn't work. It was only until I began to offer kindness to the wounded little boy that lost his father at age 8, who was orphaned because his mom went numb because of my father's abuse, my father's betrayal, right? And so until I began to offer deep kindness, the father heart of God, kindness towards that little boy, did I begin to release that need for that addiction to satiate me and to be a God to me. And that was the beautiful part of my freedom. And that was, again, 13, 14 years ago. And now I've dedicated my life to helping men, to helping women be free from that and the impacts of that harm. So those are my few categories, and hopefully you can find those categories helpful to your own journey of healing. Check out the book Stumbling Towards Wholeness if you want to dive deeper, and love to chat, questions, thoughts on any of those categories or even other stuff. I could again talk for hours about these things, but love to hear what you guys are at, or Justin, if you had anything to add.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate your share on this, and I love that the analogy there with the three main characters of the prodigal son parable there. And I've heard some of those takes. I've heard some of those things, and I've heard different aspects of that in my own life and everything. Where I want to go, I think initially, Andrew, is just talking a little bit about towards the end of your share here, you said, I tried for years all sorts of ridiculous things, and I could tell you some ridiculous stories. And you said, hey, praying that God would make me a eunuch being one of those. What are some of those efforts that you really honestly either tried hard at or wanted to have struck on you, like becoming a eunuch, that didn't work?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, accountability groups. We'd have these groups, and we created something called the jackpot. If you masturbated, you have to put $5 in the church ceiling, right? Again, our hearts were good, right? Young, um, ignorant, but good. We were trying hard, and yet it was just a bunch of people putting money in the church ceiling, like not that helpful. Because what we missed, we were focused on the behaviors, right? We were focused on behavior modification rather than what were we eroticizing. We were eroticizing childhood wounds that we didn't have the skill set to address, right? So when we look at addiction, we have to see that it actually is a map that fits our story, right? So for the clients that I work with, we look at the type of pornography, and that's my expertise and what I focus on. What are the type of pornography that you're most drawn to? Okay, what is your darkest sexual fantasy? Like that's day one, right? So we start there, and we then we begin to map out, okay, the type of porn that you're drawn to fits perfectly into your woundedness. Now, instead of talking just about the behaviorisms and the, just the steps, how do we deal with the core wounds that are causing the acting out? And so that's the essence of the work, is rather than just continuing to read a bunch of Bible verses or continuing to go to church, 100 times a week, which are the things that I used to do, and realizing I was just spinning my wheels. And then it makes you question God, right? It makes you somehow, wait, was this thing not working? And so many people lose faith rather than, no, actually, faith should point us to a deeper engagement with who we're truly meant to be.
Yeah, I love that. And, my story includes praying harder, reading scripture harder, going to church harder, serving harder, doing all of these different things harder, and trying to control control myself in those situations, and just falling flat on my face. Tell me a little bit about the turning point in your own experience, how you were awakened from the trying harder to the
Well,
what healed you.
what I've realized about myself is whatever I do it really well. So when I blew up my life, I did it quite well. Flunking out of college, living in the woods, and losing everything, and then ended up in the psychiatric ward, nearly taking my life. I had a gun in my hand, contemplating suicide. This was about 20 years ago. And so that was the, stripped naked in a padded room. I mean, it's kind of like the classic on a movie, and basically like lost everything. But when those addictions, like literally, that's where porn and these addictions to women began to destroy my life, and nearly kill me. Did I begin to put the pieces back together? Did I begin to, do hardcore therapy, and really begin to try to make sense of all these broken pieces and put together a new life, build a new life that I could actually be proud of the man I was. So that was, early on in college, about freshman year of college, when I was beginning to flunk out and blow up my life. And so about 20 years ago, that was the beginning of, the journey for me of beginning to then now, go to school to study this stuff and study psychotherapy, and really begin to find that healing, and a deeper theological understanding of who God is as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And a reminder to our live audience, if you have questions for Dr. Andrew Bauman, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of the Zoom window. We'll get to those. I've got a question for you though, Andrew. My story, the turning point was basically a 12-step type situation, going into a room of 12-step and seeing other people who had recovered and saying, hey, I want what you have, and following that. I understand that 12-step is not the monopoly on healing, on recovery, but that's my experience. What is your experience with 12-step recovery?
Yeah. I mean, there's how many millions of people have found freedom in that, right? So it would be I'd be a fool to somehow not honor that. So many people, that's where they find authenticity for the first time, right? Where they've lived a life hidden, and they've, even in church, right? And finally they go to they go many times outside of the church, and they're like, oh, I remember my favorite author, Frederick Buechner, says, man, I kind of wish all the churches get to burn down and we could just all have AA meetings as church, right? And so it's that idea that authenticity is contagious. That idea that, and I truly believe God is truth. And so the more we live in truth, the more we experience God. And so many people find that liberating truth, in church basements or, wherever they meet. And so I think it's beautiful. I think where they fail is where they don't take that next step after, after the healing, after the authenticity, after the practiced, it's practice, emotional practice. It's getting to the core wounds. And so that would be my only critique is if your 12 step doesn't get to those core wounds, then it's going to be lacking. So I think it's vital, especially at the beginning of your addiction recovery, to experience that camaraderie, community, no longer isolated in your addiction, believing lies that it's only you, but to make sure that you fully see it through, and getting to those core wounds, because it'll never stop. You can white knuckle it all you want to, but it's never going to stop until you heal those little boys and girls inside of us that are raging.
Thank you. All right. We've got a couple of questions that have come in from the live audience, and I'll ask this first one. This is from an anonymous attendee. They say, do you believe that the steps can also help with the trauma? What is your experience with that?
Yeah, definitely. And depending on, which step it is. But I encourage all my clients to do a ton of writing about their stories, right? So they're diving into their story. So that can come out in step work as well, but diving into their stories, diving into, and again, you got to get particular, right? It can't just be a 30,000 foot flyover view of your story. Yep. There was that trauma. There was this. No, we tell people we got to land the plane. So fly me in. Let's smell the dirt. Let's touch the trees. Let's tell me exactly the color of the room where the abuse happened, right? The smells, the tastes. We've got to get into our bodies, into all five senses. And so again, as long as you're doing that, but I definitely think 12-step work can help that and help lead. That can be a doorway for so many people into this deeper work.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I've done a little bit of inner child work, and it's eye-opening, but it can also be very painful, which is, like you said, lean in. How did you put it? Embrace. I can't remember how you put it, but embrace the pain of the story.
Another way to say that is we can't experience resurrection until we face crucifixion. Right. And so that's another way to say it. And so many of us, especially those who come from my faith tradition, being a Christian, we want to escape the pain. We just want the good stuff. We just want, resurrection without actually the suffering. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. The law of the harvest. I can only reap what I sow. And in order to reap the reward, I have to go through the process. What is it? The story of the little red hen. If I want to eat the bread, I've got to plant it. I've got to weed it. I've got to get through the painful things to make it happen. So very good. All right. Next question comes in from Bernadette from our live audience. Bernadette says, how do you overcome a belief in an angry and punishing God? I was raised Catholic, and this can apply to any faith tradition, really. I was raised this way and am a daily communicant and love my faith, but terrified of God the Father preventing me from a personal relationship with God. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you for that. I would want to begin to untangle whose voice is that, right? So whose voice does that emulate, that angry God? Right? Whose voice is that? And I would imagine in your story, that's going to be one or two characters, mom, dad, teacher, this. It's going to be a few prominent characters. And that voice we have to begin to untangle, because in reality, there is no condemnation for those who are in Jesus Christ. And yet the thief wants to steal, kill, and destroy, right? And so you have all these dynamics of the characters in our stories end up their voices being so loud, and that can very easily overcome the voice of an actually authentic, loving God who is wild about you, and it can be so easily misconstrued. So I would just untangle that kind of whose voice is this really, and hopefully that will be of help to deciphering what is actually true, versus what is condemnation.
Yeah. So what you mentioned there brought two things to my own mind. One in my own recovery, and the other is a question about loving God, who is wild about you. So the first I want to do is share a little experience. I was 5 years sober when I was introduced to a concept of firing the God of my understanding and hiring a new God. And I learned very quickly in this process that the God of my understanding was a small G God. It was like what you said, the voice that I heard of condemnation, of judgment, of you have to be absolutely perfect. You have to appear perfect, even if you aren't perfect, was the voice of, people in my life, like you said, parents, grandparents, social studies teacher in junior high, a boss, these voices of people that had perceived authority over me that all of a sudden transmorphed into God's voice. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Well, it just reminds me of a story. In eighth grade, I remember my science teacher, Mr. Craig, calling me a slimy slug who leaves his little trail behind him wherever he goes. Okay. That was 30 years ago. Why do I remember that? Why do I remember his curse of me? Right. Well, it's because it's rooted in my story, right? What I told you, what you already know. I'm a little boy who's lost his father at age 8, who's been orphaned, and I'm longing for affirmations by older men to name me, to bless me, to see me. And all of a sudden, so my heart is softened. And then all of a sudden, I get this curse and it stings me, right? Now, is that sexual abuse, right? No, that's not capital T trauma. And yet those little T traumas stick with us and they have to be honored, right? Those curses stick with us and we have to begin to do the undoing of that so that that trauma doesn't take me out, right? Doesn't wound me, and yet helps me become the man that I want to become.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Like you said, I have an 8th grade social studies teacher who's, and I don't remember exactly what was said, but I remember the tone of voice. I remember the body movements and everything from it that just to me, became the voice of a, lowercase g God. Very good. All right. So on the God loving you wildly, you mentioned this. You said, will I love myself wildly? And you said, that may sound prideful, but it's not. What does that look like, loving yourself wildly?
Yeah. Well, again, will you love what God loves? Will you, and another way to look at it is if you bear God's image, right? Will you then curse God? What if you lift your middle finger up to God and you said, F you, God? Like, what would that feel like? Well, that would feel horrible, right? And yet, I would argue every time you curse yourself, that's what you do. You curse God, right? So if you turn against yourself, you turn against the co-author of your story. You turn against the one who made you, whose image you bear. And that is a terrifying proposition. So will you stop cursing yourself? Will you stop then cursing God and actually love what God has created? And that is what I mean by stepping into the Father realm, loving all parts of you, becoming integrated with all of you, rather than just saying, no, I don't want that addictive part of me, right? Cutting it off. I remember I used to not talk about addiction at all, early in my practice, some 12, 13 years ago. I'm leading a workshop on addiction. And somebody asked me, well, Andrew, how did you, get into addiction? And I said, oh, because of my 13-year addiction to porn. And I froze. I never said it out loud. Right. So here I am, probably 30 people in the room. And then I'm like, but then I was like, I looked at their faces and their faces were soft. They didn't have the type of judgment and contempt that I had for myself for my addiction. So then I just kept going and just talking more about my addiction and how I got into the addiction work, and realized how kind they were. But realized for me, I hadn't talked about it out loud because my level of shame was still so high. My level of contempt and disgust for myself and my own addiction was so high. I was not living out of the kindness of God. But when I saw the kindness in their faces, it opened me up. And then that changed the trajectory of my career.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. All right, we've got a few more questions come in from the live audience. This is an anonymous attendee, and I can identify with this question. When someone is emotionally numb and non-feeling, how can they get the most from the steps, from recovery, and also overcome the fear of progressing in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Someone's emotionally numb and non-feeling. How can they get the most? Uh, you might have to take this one, Justin, because I mean, again, I would just be as a therapist, right? If you're emotionally numb, I'm curious why. Like, what is leading? Why is that a better bet? Why is that safer? What is your story around being emotionally numb? Can they still get something from the steps? Yeah, sure. And you can learn a lot, right, in your head. I don't know how marinating in your body that's going to become if you can't feel it, right? If it's disconnected from your body, right? Our body holds trauma. Our body is vital, so we have to feel it. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Justin.
Yeah, maybe I'll approach you as if you're my therapist here on this. I used to seek being numb because feeling hurt too much, whether it was good, whether it was bad. I wanted to retreat from that because the only way I knew how to medicate or to get away from emotion was to just withdraw and be numb on the inside. I didn't want to feel good or bad. And before you answer that, when I started to feel in working recovery, when I started to have those feelings and allow them to happen, even small feelings were massive. You know, the highs were, even if they were teeny tiny at the time, were massive. The lows were, because I allowed it to happen and embraced that pain and went with it. So any further thoughts on that based on what I just shared from my own experience?
Yeah, I mean, well, here for what you're saying is the reason for addiction in the first place is so we don't have to feel, right? Like, to me, that was the essence. I didn't want to feel my story. I didn't want to feel the pain, and so I wanted to numb. I wanted to be soothed, right? And so, in a sense, I think for us to overcome that addiction is to feel, is to grieve, is to feel fully human. And what you're saying of learning how to grieve, it's like, it's going to feel like a foreign language, right? Because we haven't had to do it. We never did it. We never felt, right? And so it is like you're a baby learning how to walk, when you're learning the emotional world, when you're learning the inner landscape of our heart and the complexity of what it means to be human.
Yeah, I totally, I walked that path, and even now, like you said, I'm still in emotional kindergarten. I think when those emotions come up and say, "How you feeling?" I've got probably 10 emotions rather than, however many there are that I can identify. Well, I'm angry, or I'm sad, or I feel frustrated, or I'm happy, whatever.
Sure.
And I'm learning that rainbow a little bit more.
And the beauty is we can actually, grow quite quickly when we can begin to go. You got to go to emotional workouts, right? You got to go see a therapist. You got to go to men's groups, women's groups. Like, you got to start doing that work, and you can get stronger pretty quick. You can become emotionally ripped, but it takes time. You got to go to the emotional workouts.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, another question from an anonymous attendee. At what point in a husband's recovery should the husband and wife begin to work together to repair the damage and trauma in the relationship? And what resources do you recommend for working together on recovery?
Yeah, great question. Great. This is a part that cutting edge, stuff. Dr. Omar Minwala, if you guys aren't familiar with his work, but he's doing great work on not just helping men recover, particularly sex addiction, but also the abused partner. So many times the abused partner gets forgotten in the situation. Like, hey, you just cheated on me for 20 years without me knowing, and then you expect me just to be like your biggest cheerleader? Like, wait a minute. You just lied to me for 20 years. You just abused me and cheated on me. Like, the abused partner has to take their own journey of healing, right? And then recovering from those lies, but recovering from the deceit. So Dr. Minwala talks about the deceptive, sexuality, the integrity disorder. These are language as helpful in naming yes. And for those of us who have, lived a life of deception, we've got to own that. We've got to own. And so the example I use is Whoever is the one that lied, betrayed, they're driving the car of the relationship, and they crash the car. They're driving 80, right? And they hit a tree. What is going to be the impact on your partner who trusted you to drive well? They trusted that you were going to tell the truth, that you weren't going to have a hidden life, right? So there are going to be internal bleeding, broken legs, broken limbs, right? Like they're going to have whiplash, and they're going to take years to learn as they're going through therapy, physical therapy, recovery. They're going to have to learn how to, if they want to, if they want to stay and, drive with you ever again, right? Because they have all the reason to leave after lies, deceptions. But it takes years for them to see you becoming a safe driver. So that's the 12 steps. That's the groups. That's the therapy. That's the work, the books you read. So that's that sort of thing. Is vital in the recovery process. And so people to check out in this work, let's see, Sarah McDougall. I love the work of Dr. Omar Minwala, like I said, Natalie Hoffman, her podcast Flying Free, Sheila Gregoire, creating a lot of good material. So those are a few resources. And then, follow me on Facebook and my resources as well. My book, How Not to Be an Ass, is a good one as well for women and for men, to help them understand their partners and how to become good and safe men in the recovery process. But let's not forget the women in this process that have been so deeply harmed by the betrayal.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And as a thank you for all of these resources. I will go through and I'll find links to each of these people and put them in the show notes of the podcast so that anybody listening can get quick access to those if they choose. Another resource, a 12-step resource. Yes, you've got S-Anon groups for the spouse of the addicts. You've got those things. One of the primary 12-step programs that I am part of is called SAL 12-step, Sex Addicts Lifeline 12-step. And there's a betrayed, there's the addict side, and there's the betrayed partner side, where they focus on betrayal trauma and work together to find healing from betrayal trauma, focusing specifically on that. And so if anybody's interested in that, I'll also put a link to that fellowship there in the show notes of the podcast. All right. Thank you. We've got another question from the live audience. Another anonymous attendee says, are your books and work focused on Christianity God, and can non-Christian God folk benefit?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's kind of my audience. And yet it can be translated, right? And so all of our therapy work, we work with people of all different faith backgrounds as well. But yes, as far as the books, mostly it is in that genre. And yet, I think benefiting from my book, The Psychology of Porn, Sexually Healthy Man, How Not to Be an Ass, are a little bit less kind of Christianity. And though that is in all my work as well. But I definitely think you can translate it to wherever you're at and find some help there for sure. And there's a lot of great resources as well outside of that faith tradition. I studied under Dr. Robert Masters. His work, his book, To Be a Man, is incredibly helpful. I use for all my men's groups. And that is out of that faith tradition.
What was the name of that book, that last one you just referenced?
To Be a Man by Dr. Robert Masters is the work I use for all my men's groups.
Okay, I will put that in the show note also.
Or a non-Christian resource that we use.
Okay, perfect. All right, next question from another anonymous attendee. When there is complex PTSD and someone desperately wants to heal but has so much fear of people, how can they begin to trust and feel safe with sponsors or fellows who are strangers?
Yeah, it's a great question. It takes so much time. And I like to even call it PTSR, right? Post-traumatic response. There's nothing disordered about you, right? There's nothing disordered about you. It is a response to trauma. It is a response. Your body works just fine. Your body is responding to horrific trauma. And so you've got to find those safe people, wherever it is, wherever they are, therapist or not, coach or not, whatever it is, friend, but find those safe people, because that can be incredibly helpful. And so, yeah, we have a list of people on our team that can walk with you. You just got to find somebody who can walk with you regularly. And so it is just that baby step, slowly building trust, slowly taking time to recover and retrieve your heart after years and years of being harmed.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Andrew Bauman, for that. We've got another question from the live audience, and I've written down a couple of things here too that I'll get to here in a few minutes. But this is from Alan. How do or can I, as a sex addict, come to a better understanding of my wife's pain that I caused?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I definitely would tell you to pick up the book, How Not to Be an Ass. But the biggest thing is to begin to listen to her without being defensive, without being reactive, right? Remember, you were driving the car, you crashed the car. So you're taking full responsibility, right, of the actions. And you are listening. Babe, tell me what that was like, living a lie for so long. And so there's this humility, right? When guys kind of really begin to get it, right? Their eyes change, something in their eyes change. They begin to soften their posture. They're no longer defending the wounded little boy inside of them, right? They're no longer kind of fighting for supremacy, but they're really just kind of resting in, like, I've done harm. That's not the core truth of who I am and who I'm becoming, but it is what I've done. And I'm going to own that. And then I'm not going to just slink into my shame, but I am going to humbly kind of listen and hear and listen and hear. And this could be years, right? If you've lied and cheated and, for 10, 20 years of addiction, it's like, yeah, it's going to be at least half of that to recover what you've done. It's going to take years of you not being defensive, not being reactive. And it takes a lot of hard work. And that's, again, you need to come to training. You need to continue to become emotionally strong, because it's a long way back to recovery, as far as your own relationship wounds are concerned.
Yeah, I'm going to take that into the older son of the prodigal son story there. As an addict in recovery, as somebody who's doing things and making great progress and everything like that, I am very quickly tempted to say, hey, the duty is being done. I'm obeying these things. I'm doing these things. I deserve to have trust come back at me.
Yep.
How does that mentality get overcome? What are some of the things that need to be addressed in that situation?
The crazy part is you don't get to define that. You weren't the one who got slammed into a tree, right? It's not your definition of if she feels safe or not. Sorry. Like, you did the harm. And it's her definition. She gets to lead. Now, the hope is she's getting care as you're getting care. So you're both are getting healthier. That's the goal. Right. But yeah, it's, even if you feel like you're safer, you are, and you can get applauding from your buddies, from your own group, your own therapist, but you're not going to look to her, so the thought is, I hear this from guys all the time. Let's say you're 6 months, you're a year into this, 2 years, and you're like, I don't know why my wife still doesn't trust me. It's just like, dude, you were addicted secretly to porn for 15 years and you lied to her, had sex with her, and you've literally been sober for 8 months and you've been a good man of integrity for 8 months. Let's calculate the difference of the hours. So we literally sit down and calculate, okay, I was using porn, for this long, this many years, lying this long, and it's just astronomical, right? So it's like, you've literally been a man of integrity for about a minute in comparison to, so it takes time, and you got to have patience. You got to have patience. And if you can put yourself in her shoes, and it's hard for many men to do, because we don't know what it's like to be objectified. We don't know what it's like to live in a world where you feel less than. That's been the last 3 years of my life researching women's experience of sexism and abuse in the Protestant church, and hearing these women's stories are just horrific. And it's so hard for us to get out of our story and into the story of another. But yeah, become a listener of women, and your mind will be blown if you can do it without being defensive and reactive.
Yeah. And and me following up with this can kind of come across as being defensive, but I promise it's not. What I want to ask here is, there are people listening, maybe in the live audience, definitely in the recorded audience, who are women who are struggling with the same thing that we're talking about as being a male issue.
Yeah.
How do we help them take these same steps without feeling the additional shame? I mean, I know several women personally who struggle with this, and the shame that they seem to feel seems to be magnified massively over what men feel over this same addiction. So talk to me about that.
Well, it's because it's become so normalized, right? Where it's like, in the Christian circles that I run in, it's every man's battle. It's that type of language that, every dude struggles with it. But so many women that struggle with it secretly, they seem to be left behind. They seem to be, so that does add that level of shame. And yet the truths of what I'm saying are the exact same. There's the core wound that you're sexualizing, that you're eroticizing, that you're seeking to mend through these sexual means, and it's not going to work, right? So the core issues are the same. So I know Jay Stringer in his book Unwanted are a great resource for women as well as men, understanding what's behind the pornography. But yes, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, another question from the live audience, and a reminder to our live audience, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other. We'll get to as many as we can. We're going to be running up against it here in a few minutes, but here we go. Next question from an anonymous attendee. What is your advice for married women who have repeatedly cheated on their husband, but have chosen to keep it secret as not to harm their husband? Is it best for him to know or not know?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I argue adamantly it's always best to tell the full truth. It's always best to fully be real. And that's the only way you can if your marriage does survive, that's the only way you can rebuild intimacy and trust, is starting from full authenticity. And so if you're asking, well, should I lie? Should I hide? No, no, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt him. And that's going to be the only reason to save your marriage, is in that marriage that you currently have might actually have to die. My wife and I lead, our biggest offering is marriage intensives. People fly in every week from all over the country, and we literally do funerals for marriages. We have people bury their ring. I need to get out one of those metal finders. I'm going to be rich. I have people chucking their rings all over my property, and burying rings. And but then many times after it's fully dead, then they can say it, like, should we start again? Can we actually build something new? Can we, or is it too far gone? Do we need to just bless what we've had and say goodbye? But that can only start when full truth is on the table. And that can be done, in the safety of a therapist's office, full disclosure, but it has to happen. It has to, for anything good in intimacy to grow. Deception and intimacy don't work. They don't go together. It's oil and water.
Yeah. One thing that I've had to recognize in my own recovery walk is that, when I think, why can't my marriage go back to the way it was before? That the marriage, the way it was before, wasn't real. It was a disaster. It just looked okay on the outside. I've got to build it new.
Right.
Okay. Next question here from another anonymous attendee. I'm so afraid to tell my story as I feel like I'll be betraying my family and that they'll reject and abandon me. And also that shame that I carry is debilitating. How can one navigate that?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. Well, I think this is where, and that is such a common question, actually. I don't want to betray my family. My family lives, so many of our families, they live with this secret. You're not allowed to break this norm, right? You're not allowed to tell the truth. You're not allowed to actually say what's actually going on. And yet, I would encourage you to read an article that I wrote called, what is it, like, honoring my mother and father. I'm just gonna look it up real quick. Honoring my mother and father. Like, what is actually honor? look like? Right. And how to honor your mother and father as you heal is the article. How to honor your mother and father as you heal. And I actually think telling the truth of our family of origin is actually the most honoring thing to do. Right? How did becoming inauthentic become honorable? Like, that's not honorable. Lying and acting, playing the part, right? I mean, my father was a pastor, right? He was also a sex addict and a drug addict and alcoholic secretly, right? It's like, how does me protecting that image of us being this great Christian family actually is honorable? And so I think we need to begin to tell the truth, and it takes practice, and you will be harmed. The truth is literally your family's riding this bicycle and you become this big stick who just goes and you stick it in the spokes, and it's gonna. But the prophets in the Bible were stoned, tarred, and feathered, right? It's like telling the truth does cost something, and you do have to count the cost, but I truly believe it's so worth it, right? Telling the truth is the best expression of honor you can give your parents, even if they don't believe it. I truly believe that. Even if they think you're the worst person alive, I truly believe the truth is the best way to honor.
The truth will make you free. Andrew, you've mentioned, and I just want to bring this up because it's intriguing to me. You've mentioned trees a couple of times, and I notice a tattoo on your arm. It looks like root and branch of a tree trunk. Talk to us about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, my last name is German for a tree man. And it's a very, just deep thing for me. And it's got, the leaves represent people that I've lost in my family, and my family that is here still. So we add leaves regularly to the tree. But yeah, it's a deep thing for me, and really brings me closer to God, closer to myself, the understanding of the wilderness of trees as well.
Love it. And I love that the roots of that tree are as pronounced as the branches and leaves. It goes deep and it rises high. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Before we close out here, one more question. We'll get to this one more question and then we'll close out. Okay. From an anonymous attendee. Married women follow up. Okay. As a living amends, isn't it better to not harm the husband with the truth? In the past, I decided to get needs met elsewhere because he was sexually awful. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Isn't it better not? No, I mean, I don't think harming someone with the truth is even possible. I think they may be insecure and they may lash out and they may need help, but it doesn't mean you need to be deceptive or you need to not have integrity, right? Even if they're not in a place to hear it, you still get to live with integrity. You still get to, not, if you go seek elsewhere and then you lose your integrity, what's the difference? Like, then you're just as bad in a sense, right? You're also living a deceptive life. I truly believe that we must fully live authentically to be our best selves. And that means, babe, I'm so mad at you. I feel like I want to cheat on you. Like, just say it out loud. Like, before you actually do it, you're just fully authentic. I'm so, pissed. I just need space. I don't want to be with you. Like, that to me, at least if your marriage is going to die, will you do it with integrity? Will you go out with integrity, even if your husband doesn't have any, even if your wife hasn't had any? Will you have integrity? How do you want to die? To me, I want to die with integrity, with courage. My thing for you all, I tell this to clients all the time. Would you rather be a fool or a coward? Those are your only two choices. Which one? What would you rather be, right? If you are foolish and telling the truth, at least you're not a coward, right? I would much rather go out foolish than being cowardly and hiding.
I think that's really, really deep. Typically I ask, and that may be your parting shot, but do you have any other words of wisdom that you'd like to close out with before we take this down?
That is it. Let's live in truth, break the cycles that were given to us, breaking the unhealthy family patterns that were passed down. Let's live in truth and become more liberated. God is truth. The more we live in truth, the more we can experience God.
Beautiful. Thank you again, Dr. Andrew Bauman. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting. And if we didn't get to any questions out there, if you have other questions, please consider joining our WhatsApp community by sending an email to rico12pod@gmail.com. That's RECO12POD@gmail.com. And join in our community, ask those questions, and answer others' questions that may come up. If you are inspired and want to share something of your insights in a 12-step type share, please go to the RICO 12 Shares SpeakPipe link. I put it in the chat here. It will be in the show notes of the podcast. Record your 3 to 4 minute share there. And if you've not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way to help us work our 12th step in sharing this message with others, practicing these principles in all we do. I invite the audience to come back next Friday when we will be hearing from Matt D. And I think this is a good follow-up, whose topic will be Gratefully Married to a Sexaholic. Matt D is a man who is married to a woman sexaholic, and he's going to share his experience, strength of hope, and hope how he became grateful to be married to a sexaholic in recovery. I'm looking forward to his take on this topic. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with a prayer for the abused woman that Andrew will say for us.
Yeah. Let's pray. This is for women who have felt betrayed, who have felt abused, who feel alone because of the pain of addictions. Dear God, sustainer of life, redeemer of what is broken, I need you. I need you to be close by. My heart and my body are weary, exhausted from the pain of my partner's projections onto me, his insecurities, his unfair judgments, entitlement, lack of healing from his own wounding. I can no longer bear it. My God, come be with me. I am so tired. Give me the power to say no more. Strength and safety if I need to walk away for good. May I stand in the glory of bearing your image. Knowing my deep goodness, my beauty, my brilliance and power, may I know that I am queen. May I have the courage to step away from the position of saving my partner, knowing that the saving is your work and your work alone. Help me both rest and fight. Rest into knowing the fullness of my identity and fight against the war that evil is trying to steal, kill, and destroy me. Yes, God, sustainer of life, redeemer of what is broken. Let it be.
Beautiful. Thank you. Everybody, remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this happy road of destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place. and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me, your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be. I saw stars fall from above. I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low. But now I know that I just can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.